their lantern illuminated footprints that vanished the moment they stepped toward them. I remember thinking the light looked alive before I thought anything else. Not bright, not warm, alive. Elias had bought the lantern from an antique store outside the valley 2 days earlier, lifting it from a shelf layered with dust while I wandered among rusted tools and warped photographs. It was brass with dark patches around the handle, and the glass surrounding the flame wasn't clear but faintly smoky, as if old breath had stained it from the inside. He liked forgotten things. That was always his weakness. I hated being forgotten. That was mine. We'd come to the mountain trail because Elias wanted proof of something. Not ghosts exactly. He wasn't the type to chase campfire stories. He wanted patterns. He spent years collecting accounts of places where people described impossible sensations. Hearing rivers before reaching them, losing hours, walking familiar paths that somehow rearranged themselves. The trail on Mount Kuro had enough stories to interest him. People described strange silences, missing distances, a feeling that the mountain disliked being observed. I agreed to come because I had spent the last 6 months trying to say yes to things. My life had narrowed into routines after my father's death. Work, sleep, empty weekends. I was beginning to feel like I had become a hallway with all the doors sealed shut. So I followed Elias into the mountain. Night arrived faster than I expected. One moment the trees carried dim blue evening light between their branches. The next, shadows had thickened into masses that seemed to absorb shape itself. The forest surrounding the trail grew dense with old cedar and pine, their trunks rising like pillars holding up a ceiling we couldn't see. The silence felt wrong. Not complete silence. Complete silence still feels natural somehow. You hear your own breathing, your own shifting feet. This felt selective, as though certain sounds had been removed while others remained. Our footsteps pressed into dirt and gravel. Fabric rustled. Breaths drifted white into cooling air. But no insects sang. No branches creaked. No wind moved. I noticed it before Elias did. "I don't like this," I said. My voice sounded small. Not quiet, small. Elias looked around and frowned. Then he noticed the absence. He said nothing afterward. The lantern swung between us as we walked. This flame moved strangely, not flickering with our steps. Turning, I kept seeing it angle toward the trees, toward spaces between trunks, toward darkness. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Human beings invent patterns everywhere. Faces in walls, shapes in clouds. But after 20 minutes I realized something else. Whenever the lantern shifted, Elias unconsciously followed its direction. Not much, just a few degrees. A slight drift, enough to pull us gradually from the marked trail. I almost mentioned it. Then I saw the footprints. Their lantern-illuminated footprints that vanished the moment they stepped toward them. For several seconds I simply stared. They looked fresh, bare feet, human feet, pressed into damp earth several yards ahead. I watched Elias move toward them and disappear. The footprints vanished before his boot touched the ground beside them. Not faded, not erased, gone, like a hand removing a drawing. We stood still. The lantern flame leaned forward. I felt cold rise through my stomach. Elias walked backward. The footprints returned. Further ahead. Waiting. Neither of us spoke. I remember wanting to laugh because my mind refused to fit what I was seeing into anything reasonable. Maybe shifting shadows. Maybe uneven terrain. Maybe exhaustion. But explanations felt weak even while I thought them. We followed. I don't remember deciding to. I only remember walking. The footprints always remained several yards ahead. Always visible. Always vanishing when approached. The forest changed slowly around us. Not enough to notice immediately. The trees grew wider. The spaces between them stretched farther apart. Distances began feeling uncertain. I would see a fallen trunk ahead and think it sat 20 feet away. Then reach it after 10 steps. Or 50. Time felt strange too. I checked my phone once. 11:18. I checked again what felt like half an hour later. 11:21. I told Elias. He barely reacted. He kept staring ahead. At the footprints. At the lantern. His light had changed. The glow no longer felt steady. It breathed. I don't know how else to describe it. Brightening slowly. Dimming slowly. Like sleeping lungs. And each time it brightened, the forest became clearer. Not brighter. Clearer. I would suddenly notice details hidden moments earlier. Knots in bark resembling eyes. Long scratches across trunks. Depressions in soil. More footprints. Not ahead. Beside us. Standing between trees. Bare feet facing our direction. I stopped walking. The footprints disappeared. Elias. My voice shook. He turned. I saw confusion pass across his face. Then concern. Then confusion again. You okay? I stared at him. Something felt wrong. Not with his face. With memory. I suddenly couldn't remember when he had started carrying the lantern. I tried reconstructing it. At the beginning I held it. Didn't I? No. Elias bought it. So Elias carried it. Except I remembered warmth against my palm. I remembered brass beneath my fingers. I remembered watching Elias walk ahead. The certainty slid away before I could hold it. The forest had become colder. I realized then that we should have reached the ridge hours earlier. The trail wasn't long. We should have turned back. We should have left. Instead, we kept following footprints into trees dense enough to hide the sky. My thoughts began fraying at their edges. Little things disappeared. I forgot sentences halfway through thinking them. Forgot why my hands felt numb. Forgot whether we'd eaten earlier. The lantern kept breathing. The mountain kept listening. Because I started noticing reactions. Subtle ones. When fear rose sharply inside me, nearby branches trembled. Not from wind, just brief shivers. When I looked behind us too long, distant trunks seemed to lean slightly away. When panic entered my chest, I heard movement beneath the ground. Slow movement, like enormous things shifting in sleep. I stopped telling myself it wasn't real. Reality had already stopped asking permission. Eventually, the footprints led us into a clearing. Except clearing wasn't right. It looked carved. Circular earth without grass or stones. No trees inside it. Just smooth ground. The lantern brightened. The footprints continued toward the center. Then stopped. Elias walked forward. I followed slowly. Something felt terribly wrong. I looked down. At first, I didn't understand what I saw. The ground wasn't smooth. It only looked smooth from a distance. Because it was covered entirely with footprints. Thousands of them. Layered over one another. Bare human feet pressing into dirt from every direction. Some small. Some large. Some impossibly long. All facing inward. Toward where we stood. My mouth went dry. The lantern dimmed. Then brightened. Dimmed. Brightened. And for one terrible moment I realized something. The footprints weren't impressions. They were appearing. Slowly pressing downward. As if invisible feet stood around us. As if countless unseen people surrounded the clearing. Watching. Waiting. I heard Elias whisper my name. Very softly. I turned. The lantern hung from my hand. I stared at it. The brass handle rested against my fingers. Cold. Familiar. Elias looked pale. Terrified. When did you take that? He asked. I couldn't answer. Because I didn't remember taking it. Because somewhere deep inside me I felt a memory moving. Not emerging. Returning. A memory of walking here before. A memory of holding this lantern. Of following footprints through impossible darkness. Of reaching this clearing. Then leaving alone. The thought felt insane. Until I noticed something near my feet. Fresh footprints. One pair. Bare feet. My size. Leading into the center of the clearing. Leading from nowhere. I looked behind us. There were no footprints leaving. On some nights afterward, I would catch myself standing beside windows without remembering walking there. I would be staring toward distant tree lines beyond town lights, feeling certain that something stood among them. Not waiting for me, remembering me, utterly still, So even now, I still wake during the middle of the night thinking about that mountain. About the things I forgot there. Elias refuses to speak about it anymore. Sometimes I think I imagined parts of it. Grief can do terrible things. Fear can do worse. But every few weeks I wake to darkness and see pale light breathing beneath my bedroom door. Not bright, not warm, alive. And on mornings after I see it, I find faint traces of dirt beside my bed. Bare footprints, always leading away. A cold breeze circled their camp, though the air around them was perfectly still. I noticed it before I said anything. The trees beyond our campsite stood motionless against the mountainside. Their branches held perfectly still beneath the moonlight, every pine needle frozen as if the forest had been pressed beneath glass. Smoke from our campfire rose straight upward in a narrow gray line and disappeared into darkness without drifting. But something cold touched the back of my neck. It moved gently, not a gust, not wind, a movement. It slipped across my shoulders, passed in front of me, and continued around the campfire toward Daniel and Lena. I watched the flames. They didn't react. The smoke continued rising in a straight line. The cold kept moving. Around us, Daniel looked up from the small camping stove beside him. "You feel that?" Lena paused while tightening the zipper on her sleeping bag. I nodded. No one said anything after that, because there wasn't much to say. There are strange sensations people ignore in ordinary places. A draft through an old house, sudden chills in empty rooms. You explain them and move on. But mountains at night feel different. Out there, explanations become thinner. We'd spent most of the day hiking toward an isolated ridge several miles beyond the main trails. Daniel had found photographs online months earlier and became obsessed with seeing the place himself. That was Daniel. He chased things, views, experiences, places no one bothered reaching. Lena came because she loved him enough to follow him into discomfort. I came because I had recently learned what happened when I stayed still for too long. My divorce had finished 4 months earlier. Everyone told me distraction helped. Keep moving. Stay around people. Say yes. So when Daniel invited me, I agreed. Now I sat beside a small fire high in the mountains, wondering why the darkness beyond camp looked deeper than darkness should look. The cold breeze completed another circle. I felt it pass behind me, slowly, purposefully. Then it disappeared. Silence settled around us. I stared into the fire. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. Wrong in the way a familiar face feels wrong when a smile lasts slightly too long. I realized what it was after several seconds. The forest had gone quiet. Not normal nighttime quiet. Selective quiet. The crackling fire remained. Fabric shifted when Lena moved. I could hear Daniel breathing beside me. But the mountain itself had gone silent. No insects. No distant birds. No movement among trees. No wind. Nothing. I became aware of my own heartbeat. Daniel looked toward the woods. "You hear that?" Lena frowned. "Hear what?" "Exactly." No one laughed. I wanted someone to laugh. I wanted someone to say we were acting ridiculous. Instead, we sat listening to nothing. The silence seemed to stretch outward, as if the campsite had become surrounded by invisible walls holding everything away. Then the breeze returned. It emerged from behind me again, cold enough to raise goosebumps across my arms. This time it moved closer to the fire. It circled us once, twice. I watched the flames carefully. Still no movement. No response. The cold passed beside my face. I smelled something briefly. Damp earth. Old stone. Something faint underneath. Like wet leaves left too long in darkness. Then it vanished. Lena stood. "I'm going to use the bathroom." Daniel looked toward the tree line. "Don't go far." She rolled her eyes and grabbed her flashlight. The beam moved between trunks as she walked away, then disappeared. I stared after her. The darkness beyond camp felt strange. Distances seemed unclear. The flashlight should have remained visible longer. Instead, it vanished almost immediately among trees. Daniel noticed too. That was fast. I nodded. We sat quietly. Minutes passed. The breeze returned. This time it moved around only Daniel and me. The cold avoided Lena's empty chair. I felt unease tighten slowly inside my chest. Not fear exactly. Fear arrives sharply. This was quieter. A gradual feeling that reality had shifted slightly while I wasn't paying attention. Daniel stood. She's taking a while. I checked my phone. No signal. 10:43 p.m. Only 15 minutes had passed. Felt longer. Daniel walked toward the woods. Lena? No answer. His voice seemed swallowed immediately, not absorbed by distance. Stopped, like the forest ended several feet beyond us. He called again. Nothing. Then we saw light moving through trees. Lena returned. Daniel relaxed instantly. Jesus. She frowned. What? You were gone forever. What are you talking about? She sat beside the fire and looked confused. I was gone maybe 2 minutes. Daniel stared at her. Neither spoke. I checked my phone again. 10:45 p.m. 2 minutes. I looked at the woods. I was certain 15 minutes had passed. Certain. The confidence disturbed me more than confusion would have. The breeze moved again. Around Lena this time. Only Lena. I watched her expression change slightly. Her eyes shifted toward darkness. You guys hear that? Daniel looked up. Hear what? She stared toward trees. It sounded like. She stopped. What? Lena frowned harder. I don't know. The fire cracked sharply. Everyone flinched. No one laughed. I noticed then that the shadows around camp had changed. Not moved. Changed. The darkness beyond the firelight seemed closer. Trees stood where trees should stand. But spaces between them felt deeper. Longer. I had the strange impression that if I walked beyond camp, I would continue walking much farther than the terrain allowed. As if distance itself had become uncertain. I said nothing, because saying strange thoughts aloud gives them shape. Hours seemed to pass afterward. Or maybe minutes. Time felt slippery. We talked occasionally, but conversations dissolved quickly. Words felt out of place, like speaking too loudly inside a church. The silence kept returning. Waiting. The breeze continued circling camp. Always slow. Always cold. Always moving despite motionless trees. Eventually Daniel stood and walked toward the edge of firelight. He stared into darkness. What are you looking at? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, I thought someone was standing there. Lena looked up sharply. What? Daniel blinked. Nothing. He sat down. But I noticed something. His chair had moved. Only slightly. A few inches farther from the woods. I don't think he realized he'd done it. The fire burned lower. Shadows lengthened. The cold circles grew tighter. Smaller. Closer. I became increasingly aware of where it moved. Because it never crossed through the center of camp. Never through the fire. Always around us. Around us. Around us. Like something tracing a boundary. I thought about saying it. I thought about asking if anyone else noticed. But I was afraid. Not of sounding stupid. Afraid they would agree. Lena eventually fell asleep inside her tent. Daniel followed later. I stayed awake beside dying coals pretending I wasn't afraid. The mountains stretched dark against the sky. No stars moved. No clouds passed. Nothing changed. The breeze continued its slow circles. I watched smoke rise upward. Straight upward. Still no wind. I remember thinking exhaustion was beginning to affect me. Because I started noticing strange things. Tiny things. The trees nearest camp leaned very slightly whenever fear tightened inside me. Not much. Barely visible. As though they were listening. When panic eased, they straightened. When my heartbeat quickened, distant branches seemed to tremble. I rubbed my eyes. Looked again. Stillness. Perfect stillness. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself fear creates patterns. Humans find meaning in randomness. But deep down I knew something worse. I wasn't finding patterns. I was noticing them. The realization sat heavily inside me. I looked toward Daniel's tent, toward Lena's, toward the dark woods surrounding us. The breeze passed behind me again. Except this time it didn't continue. It stopped, right behind my chair. I felt cold against the back of my neck. Breathing cold. Not air moving. Breathing. Very slow. I couldn't turn around. I don't mean I physically couldn't. I mean every instinct inside me screamed not to. Because sometimes terror isn't the fear of something being there. Sometimes it's the certainty that something is. Minutes passed. Or seconds. The cold remained. I stared at the dying fire. Eventually I heard movement behind me. Footsteps. Soft footsteps circling camp. I almost called Daniel's name. Almost. Then I remembered Daniel's tent was directly in front of me. And I could see him sleeping inside through the mesh. I watched his unmoving shape. Watched Lena's tent beside his. The footsteps continued. Slow circles around camp. Around. 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 The trees never moved. The smoke never drifted. The night remained perfectly still. Except for the thing walking. By morning the breeze was gone. Birds had returned. Wind moved through branches normally. Everything looked ordinary. Daniel and Lena acted strangely quiet while we packed. No one mentioned the night. I wanted to. I almost did several times. Then I noticed something near the edge of camp. A trail in the dirt. Not footprints. Just a narrow line. A shallow groove circling our campsite. Perfectly around it. As if something had walked around us all night, dragging its fingers through the earth. Neither Daniel nor Lena looked at it. Neither acknowledged it. Maybe they didn't see. Maybe they chose not to. I never asked. Months later, I still wake some nights feeling cold air moving around my bed while curtains remain perfectly still. Sometimes I lie awake listening. Because occasionally I hear something else. Not footsteps. Breathing. Slowly circling. Waiting for me to notice.